Fyre Eyes, written, narrated, and illustrated by Cynthia Louise. Chapter 1. The enchanted banners of Arcana Witches Academy had been charmed to shift color every hour on graduation day, gold at dawn, deep violet by mid-morning, and now as the ceremony wound through its final speeches, a rich emerald. Alora Windmere sat in the third row of the graduating class and tried to look as though she was listening. She wasn't listening. She was mentally packing. She had one small suitcase to put all of her worldly possessions in and didn't know how far or for how long she would have to carry it all after graduation. It had started as a way to pass the time through Headmistress Vale's address, a speech that was, by Laura's account, in its 42nd minute. The wardrobe first, she decided. Fold the heaviest robes flat against the base of the suitcase. Use a compression charm on the rest. Books would need their own stacking enchantment. Spines aligned. Her potion supplies were the real challenge. She'd need a containment barrier around the glass, something breathable. Her thought was interrupted by the headmistress. And it is my great honor to present this year's top distinction in magical theory and spellcraft to Alora Windmere. Alora stood before she fully registered her own name. The applause was warm and generous, and she crossed the stage feeling slightly outside her own body. Headmistress Vale pressed the rolled certificate into her hands and held on for a moment longer than necessary. Remarkable instincts, the headmistress said quietly, under the noise of the crowd. The Academy hasn't produced a student with your adept caliber of magic in some years, Miss Windmere. Whatever you do next, do it boldly. Thank you, Alora said, which was entirely inadequate for everything she had done for her over the years. But the headmistress had already released her hand and was moving on, and Alora walked back to her seat with the certificate. Alora caught her reflection briefly in the polished surface of the trophy cabinet as she passed, strawberry blonde hair escaping its pins in the way it always did by midday, blue-green eyes that her dormitory neighbors had once spent an entire dinner debating the precise color of. Sea glass, her friend Senna had declared finally. Alora had never thought much about it either way. She had more interesting things to think about. The celebration afterward was loud and sprawling, spilling out of the great hall and across the lawns. There were little clusters of students and families, refreshments that kept refloating past on charmed trays, someone's enchanted confetti still looping in spirals near the fountain. Alora had hugged her friends, promised to write, meant it sincerely, and had been working her way toward the drink table when a voice cut through the noise from just behind her right shoulder. You look pleased with yourself. Alora turned. Mira Brayburn had stood with a glass held loosely in one manicured hand, her dark hair pinned to perfection, wearing the same expression she had deployed in Alora's direction for years, a sort of pleasant, steady cruelty that she had elevated to an art form. Mira had never needed a reason to dislike Alora. Alora had long suspected that one of the reasons, such as it was, had dark hair and was currently somewhere across the lawn. Mira, Alora said, in a tone reserved for conversations she did not intend to have. Top marks again, Mira tilted her head. Congratulations, you must be so proud. She paused, timing it. I do hope you enjoyed today. I imagine the rest of the summer is going to be rather less celebratory. Alora picked up a glass from a passing tray. Is there something you wanted to say? Only that I happened to overhear a rather interesting conversation earlier. Mira's eyes were bright and with pleasure. Luke and Kai near the East Colonnade. I wasn't trying to listen, obviously. These things just carry. She let the words sit there a moment. His parents, apparently, have made their feelings very clear. They don't want him getting serious with someone who has no family, no status, no name worth attaching to theirs. A small sympathetic tilt of the head that contained no sympathy whatsoever. An orphan of no importance. I think the phrase was, not the sort of connection the Virethorns are looking for. The lawn noise continued around them. Someone laughed very loudly nearby. Alora looked at Mira. Her expression didn't change because she was excellent at hiding her feelings, which was a skill she had developed young and found continuously useful. And naturally, Mira continued, smoothing an invisible crease from her sleeve, his parents would find someone with the right background far more suitable, someone with a proper family, a real name. She met Alora's eyes with a smile so composed it must have taken practice. I'm just being honest with you. I thought you deserved to know. "How thoughtful," Alora said. "If you'll excuse me." She moved away through the crowd before Mira could add anything further, holding her glass and keeping her pace unhurried, because she would not give Mira the satisfaction of watching her rush and projected a calm front. She wouldn't believe it from Mira, who had watched Luke across every shared classroom for years, with poorly concealed want, who would say anything tonight if she thought it might serve her. Alora wouldn't take this from Mira's mouth as a fact. She would hear it, if there was anything to hear, from Luke. The truth was that Alora had learned early not to build her life on other people's permanence. She had been an orphan since before she was old enough to form memory of being anything else. Her parents gone before her first birthday, and the circumstances surrounding their deaths were a mystery. She had spent her early childhood years in the quiet, slightly uncomfortable care of Thornmere Orphanage, decent enough as such places went, run by people who were dutiful if not warm, until Headmistress Vale had taken note of her aptitude and arranged for her to come to Arcana Witches Academy at 12 and let her stay year-round. The dormitory room had been hers for 6 years and had become her home. She had arrived with no family to speak of, and then, several months earlier, a letter had arrived from an estate solicitor on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, informing her that she had been named the sole inheritor of a property, a manor called Emberlight, left to her by a great-aunt named Bess Kane, a woman she had never met and had not, until that letter, known existed. The solicitor's letter was careful and formal. It told her that a second letter with full directions to Emberlight Manor would follow after her graduation, when the time is right. It also, in a single sentence near the bottom of the page, asked her to keep the inheritance to herself, tell no one. Alora had read that line 3 times. She had thought about telling Luke. They had been together for nearly a year by then, and she had believed, or had wanted to believe, that he was someone she could tell things to, but the letter had asked her not to. And more than that, underneath the logical argument about following the estate's instructions, her instincts had said no. Simply, clearly, no. She had never fully understood that instinct, only that it had been present from the moment she read the letter. She had wondered why Bess was being so secretive. She had wondered what it meant that an aunt that she had never known had left her a house and asked her to tell no one about it, as though telling might be dangerous. She had kept the secret, she obeyed the letter and her gut in equal measure, and she had said nothing to Luke, and standing there now on the graduation lawn with Mira's words still ringing unpleasantly in her ears, she was beginning to feel that she had been right too. She found him near the stone steps at the far edge of the lawn. He was moving toward her with purpose, and the expression on his face showed that he had something important to say. She knew before he spoke that Mira had been telling the truth. "Alora," he smiled, but it didn't quite reach where it usually did. "Can we talk?" "Fine," she said. He paused, recalibrating. Then he went ahead. "I need to talk to you about us." He ran his hand through his hair. She had learned he did that when he was uncomfortable. "I care about you. I want you to know that first. This past year has meant a great deal to me." Has meant. Past tense already. "My family," he continued, "has certain expectations, plans for my future that they're quite specific. My parents have worked hard to build something, and the path forward for me involves connections and alliances that are..." He stopped. Tried again. "They have a vision for my life, and they don't see me in it," Alora said. He looked pained. "It's not a reflection of who you are." "It's exactly a reflection of who I am," she said. "An orphan with no status." She watched his face. "That's it, isn't it?" He didn't deny it. Around them people had gone very still, listening while pretending not to. She was aware of it. She chose to continue anyway. "You don't have to sugarcoat it. Just say what it is." He looked for a long moment. He genuinely looked heartbroken. "I'm sorry," he said finally. It sounded like he meant it, in whatever way he was capable of meaning things. "I genuinely am." She nodded once. She said nothing further, and Luke Firethorn, who had run out of prepared words, excused himself and moved away through the crowd, and the small radius of eavesdroppers quietly dissolved back into the party as though they had never been paying attention at all. Mira had been among the eavesdroppers and turned to follow Luke. Alora stood where she was for a moment, holding her glass, looking at the space he had vacated. She didn't cry. She had known how to not cry in public since she was 7 years old, and had decided that grief, if it had to exist, would exist on her own terms and in her own time. What she felt instead was something more complicated and less dramatic than tears. She was sad, but not for this Luke, the one who had caved to his family's expectations. She was sad for the Luke she had spent a year believing he was, the one who had seemed genuinely curious about her magic and her mind, the one who had been good company on cold evenings, and had laughed at the right things, and had felt for stretches of time like someone real. She had loved that version of him. She was relatively certain now that version had never quite existed, and there was grief in realizing that the thing you were mourning was not a person, but a portrait you had painted yourself, with kindness and misplaced faith as your materials. She let herself feel it for 30 seconds. Then she set her glass down on the nearest flat surface, straightened, and went to find Senna. Somewhere behind her, she was dimly aware, Mira was watching. She didn't turn around. She didn't give Mira or the crowd, or Luke, wherever he had gone, the satisfaction of seeing anything on her face except the ordinary expression of a young woman moving through a party. She had an inheritance nobody knew about. She had a second letter still coming. She had top marks in magical theory and spellcraft, and a suitcase full of her life waiting to be packed. Whatever she had thought she was losing tonight, she decided, she had never actually had. And whatever was waiting for her, the manor and all its secrecy, the letter that would come when the time is right, that, at least, was genuinely hers. She walked on across the lawn and didn't look back. Chapter 2. Alora had slept badly the night after graduation, and had woken early, lying in the narrow dormitory bed staring at the ceiling she had memorized over many years before deciding that staring at it any longer would not improve anything. She got up. She made tea with the small kettle she'd never bothered to replace after the handle cracked in the third year. She stood at the window with the mug held in both hands and watched the academy grounds emerge from the early mist, and she thought about the second letter. It hadn't come. She had checked yesterday after the ceremony, after Luke, after everything. Had gone to the academy post room with the feeling she was trying very hard not to characterize as anxious, and found nothing. The first letter from Bess's estate had been so precise in its formality, so careful in its language, that she had read it a dozen times looking for some instruction she might have missed. A second letter containing full directions to Emberlight Manor will be sent to you upon graduation, when the time is right. That was all it said on the matter. When the time is right, as though time had opinions, as though her inheritance would be delivered according to some schedule she was not privy to, and had no means of influencing. She didn't understand why everything had to be so secretive. The first letter had asked her to tell no one, and she had obeyed. She told herself there was good reason for the caution, even without knowing what the reason was. But the secrecy would be considerably easier to tolerate if the second letter would simply arrive and tell her what she was supposed to do next, because she had no idea what she was going to do next otherwise. Instead, she had a name, Emberlight Manor, that she had turned over in her mind so many times it had started to feel less like a name and more like a question, and the knowledge that somewhere there was a house that belonged to her, and she could not get to it. Until the time is right. Alora finished her tea, set the mug down more firmly than necessary, and decided that the most productive thing she could do with her restlessness was pack. The compression charm came easier in the morning quiet. She worked methodically, wardrobe first, then books, then the careful engineering of the potion bottles, each one settled into its containment barrier to prevent broken glass in her suitcase. The small enchantments she had accumulated over 8 years went in last. Then the cracked kettle, packed out of stubbornness more than sentiment. The star chart that had been pinned above her desk since the second year, rolled and compressed to the width of a pencil. Her notebook, the one filled with her own theoretical annotations that was arguably more valuable than anything else in the case, tucked in last, against the side where she could reach it. She snapped the suitcase clasps closed and straightened. The room was empty. She picked up the case by its handle, perfectly balanced, lighter than it had any right to be, and crossed to the door. Her hand closed around the knob. She stopped and turned around. The room looked smaller without her things in it. The bare mattress on the iron frame, The desk with its ghost of ink stains she had never quite managed to charm out of the wood. The window with its angle of morning light that she associated with finishing an essay at the last possible moment. She had come to this room at 12 years old, arriving from the orphanage with one bag and the expectation that she would go home for the holidays like everyone else and return in September. It had taken one autumn term for it to become clear that there was no home to go to. Headmistress Vale had made no ceremony of it. She had simply arranged for the room to remain Alora's year-round, and had never mentioned it again. It was, Alora had understood even then, an act of quiet and considerable kindness. The room had been her home for 6 years. "Goodbye," she said aloud, to the ink-stained desk and the familiar window and the version of herself that had slept here through 6 years of becoming. To the 12-year-old who had arrived with one bag and no expectation that anyone would make space for her, and had found slowly that the space had been made. "Thank you," she whispered. She meant it for the room and for the woman who had given it to her and for the years themselves, which had been hard in places and luminous in others, and entirely irrevocably hers. Just as her heart told her she was ready to move on, face the unknown, and begin a new chapter of life, a loud tap at the window broke the silence. A raven sat on the outside ledge. Tied it to its legs were two things, a small scroll of parchment and a key on the length of dark cord. She crossed the room and opened the window. The morning air came in, cool and carrying the faint smell of the grounds after rain. The raven extended its leg, and Alora untied the scroll and the key with careful fingers. The moment the cord came free, the raven simply was not there anymore. One moment it existed on the ledge, and the next the ledge was empty. Alora looked at the empty space for a moment. Then she looked at the key. It was old silver and ornate with a ruby jewel in the center, and teeth that were too complex to belong to any ordinary lock. She closed her fingers around it and unrolled the scroll. "My dear Alora, if this letter has found you, then I am gone, and you have finished your studies, and you are standing at the threshold of your new life, with everything packed, and nowhere yet to go. I always did have reasonable timing. The key you are holding is connected to Emberlight Manor's front door. Use it on any door at all, to a room you would like regular access to, and that door will open to the manor instead, at first, but return you to whatever room that door would regularly open. You may travel freely between them, and the connection will hold for as long as you need it. Choose carefully, choose somewhere that matters to you and is fairly private. There is a great deal I would have liked to tell you in person, my dear. I'm sorry we did not have the time. What I can tell you is that the manor has been waiting for you, and so has everything in it. Go and see. All my love, your great Aunt Bess. P.S. The timing of this letter is not accidental. It arrived when it did because you were ready to leave your old life behind and face the unknown, whatever may come. Oh, and your inheritance of the manor and living there needs to remain secret." Alora read the letter twice, then she looked at the key again. The timing of this letter was not accidental. The raven had not come last night after the ceremony, when she had been sitting with the hollow aftermath of Luke's very public goodbye, and would have been glad of a distraction. It had not come this morning when she woke, or while she was packing. It had come at the precise moment she had turned around, said goodbye, and declared herself ready. The moment she was ready to face whatever may come had been the right time. She found she did not entirely know what to do with that. She set that aside for now and focused on the instruction. Any door, any room you would like regular access to. She turned the key over in her fingers and thought about it with genuine care. Her dormitory room, but she was about to relinquish it, and besides, it had already felt behind her. And then she stopped considering alternatives because she already knew there was only one door she had spent years wanting to open, and had always been closed to her. The door to the secret wing of Mist Vale Library. She had walked past it her entire life, on school trips as a child, on her own during academy holidays, and on every visit she had made to the building she felt most at home in after the academy itself. It sat at the back of the library, plain dark wood, no sign, always locked, and she had been unable to stop being curious about it since she was old enough to notice that curiosity was something she felt. She had asked about it once at 15 and been told it was a private archive, in a tone that did not invite follow-up questions, and she had accepted that and kept wondering anyway. She put the key around her neck on its cord, tucked it under her collar where it sat warm against her sternum, and picked up her suitcase. She had a library to get to. Mistvale was a quiet, peaceful village. The cobblestones were still damp from overnight rain. The shop fronts were just opening. The hanging baskets along the main street were extravagantly green in the low light of the morning. Alora had spent enough academy holidays here to know every turn of it, and she walked the familiar route from the academy gates to Marrow Street with her suitcase rolling behind her and the key warm at her collarbone. The Mistvale Library and Archive occupied a handsome stone building 3 steps up from the pavement. It had been built by a benefactor whose name appeared on a small brass plaque to the left of the door that she had never paid much attention to. By the standards of a village this size, it was extraordinarily large and well-stocked. Deep stacks, a proper archive room, periodicals going back further than seemed entirely necessary. The door was already unlocked. Alora hefted her suitcase up the steps and pushed it open. The main floor was empty of other patrons at this hour, and the only figure was the one behind the front desk, working through what appeared to be a cataloging task, with focused patience and the appearance of being genuinely interested. Ash Bloom was 19, handsome with light brown hair that fell slightly across his forehead, and blue eyes that were, at present, tracking a card catalog entry with quiet concentration. He had ink-stained fingers from working around books consistently. He always seemed more observant than he generally let on. Alora had noticed that quality in him across her various visits there, the way he seemed to register everything that came through the door without appearing to look up. He looked up as she came in, noting the suitcase with a neutrally professional expression. He was a librarian who had seen stranger things than a young woman arriving with her luggage. "Morning," he said pleasantly. "Good morning." Alora rested one hand on the desk. "I've just graduated from the academy. I'm heading off afterward. I just wanted to do some research before I left Mistvale." Something in his expression warmed. "Congratulations. What are you researching?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," she said, which was true in the ways that mattered. "I think I'll know when I find it. Thank you, though." She moved away from the desk before he could ask anything further, heading with confident purpose toward the back of the library, past the general stacks and the periodicals and the local history section, until the shelving gave way to a short passage, and the passage ended at a plain dark door she had been walking past since childhood. She stopped in front of it. It was exactly as she remembered, unremarkable in every deliberate way, the kind of door designed to be overlooked by anyone not specifically looking for it. The lock was iron, a large format keyhole that had been sealed a long time. There was no handle on the outside. She had confirmed that fact herself once, at 15, when she had been quite sure there was no one watching. She reached under her collar and drew out the key. Standing in the quiet of the passage with library sounds distant behind her, she held it up and looked at it one more time, the ruby jewel, the complex teeth, and then she put it in the lock. It didn't resist. It didn't require coaxing or force. The key met the lock with seamless ease, like it had always belonged there, although the key appeared like it wouldn't fit. The moment she turned it, the door appeared to swing open by magic, though it didn't open to the restricted archive of the Mistvale Library. It opened to a hallway she had never seen, stone-floored, lit by wall sconces burning with a low golden warmth, the walls pale gray and carrying the faint mineral smell of a house built very close to the sea. A coat rack stood to the left. A narrow side table to the right held an empty ceramic vase with a small chip in its rim. Beyond it, a staircase curved upward, out of sight, and beyond that, somewhere further in, she could hear the sound of wind against old glass. The air that came through the doorway was different from the library's air in every way, salt and dusty, musty antiques. Alora Windmere stood on the threshold of Emberlight Manor for the first time, her suitcase at her side and Bess's letter folded in her coat pocket, and felt, underneath the nerves and the uncertainty and the strangeness of a morning, the quiet, solid, unmistakable sensation of arriving somewhere that had been expecting her. She picked up her suitcase and stepped through. Chapter 3. Alora stepped through, and the door swung closed behind her. She stood for a moment in the entrance hall of Emberlight Manor and let her eyes adjust and her mind catch up with the fact that she had just walked through a door in a village library and arrived somewhere else entirely. The stone floor beneath her feet was pale gray, worn smooth by years of use into a subtle dip at the center of each flagstone. The walls were the same pale gray, interrupted by the wall sconces she had seen from the doorway. Iron brackets holding glass vessels with candles in them. The coat rack to her left held nothing. The ceramic vase on the side table was empty. The staircase curved away to the upper floor in a wide, graceful arc of dark wood. And over all of it, a layer of dust and cobwebs that belonged to a house that had been waiting for a very long time. She left her suitcase at the foot of the stairs and went to find a window first, because she wanted to know where she was before she knew anything else. The nearest one was at the end of the entrance hall, tall and narrow, the glass old enough to have a slight warp in it that bent the view outside into something fractionally dreamlike. She pressed close and looked through. The manor sat on a cliff top. Below and in every direction that wasn't solid rock or the manor's own walls, the sea moved, gray-green and vast. The sea threw itself at the base of the cliff. White spray exploded up the rock face and fell back and rose again. The wind she had heard from the hallway was not distant. It pressed against the old glass and made the frame creak with low, constant pressure. The sky above the water was the pale white of early morning. There were no other buildings visible, no roads that she could see from this angle, no village lights, nothing on the horizon except water and the sky. The manor sat at the absolute edge of the world, it seemed, with nothing between it and the open sea except the cliff, which dropped away into the churning gray below. Alora had never experienced this type of remote anywhere she had lived, which had always been in villages or institutions with neighbors and noise. This was something else entirely. She found to her own surprise that she liked it immediately. She retrieved her suitcase, carried it up the curving staircase, and found a bedroom that seemed cozy to her liking. It had a four-poster bed with heavy curtains and a deep teal that faded evenly over the years, a dressing table with a large oval mirror, a wardrobe of dark wood, and windows on two sides that looked out over the cliff top and the sea. There were cobwebs thick at the ceiling corners trailing from the curtain rails, threading the wardrobe handles in fine silver architecture. The dust lay undisturbed on every surface. Alora set her suitcase on the bed, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. She started with a general clearing charm, wide and sweeping. She walked it through the first bedroom, then upstairs to the corridor, then took it downstairs room by room. The magic came easily. It always did in spaces where it felt welcomed. And Amberlight, for all its dust and neglect, felt like somewhere magic had always been at home. The windows responded like they were glad to be attended to, the air lifting and brightening as she went. She found a kitchen, large, stone-flagged, with a hearth big enough to stand in, and copper pots hanging from the ceiling hooks that chimed softly when the draft from the cleaning charm passed through. A sitting room with deep armchairs arranged around in a fireplace, the ash in the grate cold and long settled. A study with a desk buried under papers she would need to examine properly at some point, when she understood better what she was looking for. A small room off the kitchen that appeared to be a still room, lined with shelves of old glass jars that held dried things she couldn't immediately identify. A narrow bathroom with ancient plumbing that took 3 attempts, and an encouragement charm to coax into working, but did eventually work. And then off the far right end of the ground floor corridor, a set of double doors, taller than the others, slightly more formal in their framing, she found a library. It was the most beautiful room in the house. It was also the most wrong. The room was 2 stories tall, with a gallery running around the upper level, accessible by a spiral staircase of the same dark carved wood as the main banister. The shelving covered every wall from floor to ceiling, dark wood, fitted and permanent. The reading table in the center was long enough to seat 8, with a leather surface worn soft by years of use. 2 fireplaces faced each other across the width of the room. The windows were the largest in the house, east-facing, and the morning light came through them in long, pale columns that illuminated the room in extraordinary, luminous detail. Every shelf was empty. Not a single book remained. The shelves were clean of everything except the dust that had settled evenly across them in the vacancy, and the ghost of rings left by objects that had once stood there, and been removed. Hundreds of books, Alora estimated, running her eye along the shelves, perhaps more, gone. She stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, taking in the empty shelving with a feeling she couldn't immediately categorize. It was somewhere between unease and sadness, like walking into a house and finding the walls bare of all the pictures. The room seemed as though it had been deliberately stripped. She had an immediate knowing that someone malevolent had taken the books. Someone had gone shelf by shelf through a library that had clearly been extensive and remarkable, and had removed everything from it. Why? She made a note of it, mentally, and decided to get to the bottom of that later, and went back to the kitchen to find the hearth and encourage it to produce something warm. She would have stayed inside longer, unpacking and exploring, had the wind not dropped. It was the change in sound that drew her attention. The constant low pressure against the windows eased for a few minutes in the mid-morning, and in the relative quiet she became aware of something she hadn't been able to hear through the storm sound before. A feeling more than a sound, something below her or below the house, coming up through the stone of the cliff. She put down the cup she was holding and went outside. The clifftop grounds of Ember Lake were wild, and the garden hadn't been tended to in years. Paths still showed through the overgrowth if you knew how to look for them, and she followed the one that curved around the eastern face of the manor toward the cliff edge, keeping a sensible distance from the drop, letting the wind take her hair and the salt air fill her lungs. The cliff face was dramatic up close, sheer and dark, the rock face striated in layers that told of years in compressed stone, dropping to the churning water below in one uncompromising vertical fall. She walked the cliff path northward, following the sensation she had felt from inside, the warmth coming up through the rock in that rhythmic way that pulled at something instinctual in her she couldn't quite name. She almost missed the entrance. It was set into the cliff face at a point where the path curved closest to the rock, a wide, low-arched opening, partially obscured by the angle of the stone and a thick growth of dark-leaved coastal shrubs that had spread themselves across the lower portion of the entrance with thorough dedication. If she hadn't been looking at the cliff face directly, walking this close to it, she would have passed it entirely. She pushed through the shrubs, ducked under the low arch of the entrance, and stepped into the cavern. It was enormous. The ceiling vaulted upward into darkness a long way above her head, and the walls spread wide in a roughly oval shape that the sea had carved over centuries into the base of the cliff. The rock worn smooth in places and jagged in others, dark stone glistening with moisture where the sea spray reached. The sound of the ocean was different in here, amplified, resonant, a low continuous roar that moved through the stone of the floor and up through the soles of her boots and into her bones. The light came from two sources, the entrance behind her and a wide natural fissure high up in the cliff face at the back of the cave that emitted a column of pale sky light falling directly onto the center of the cavern floor. And in the center of the cavern floor, directly in the column of light from above, there was a nest. It was not a nest in any small or delicate sense of the word. It was a construction of obsidian stone and compacted ash, black and gray, deep and deliberately shaped, the stones arranged in a wide concave bowl. The ash was pale and fine, packed in layers between the stones, and it was warm with a living, present heat that she could feel from 3 feet away, as though the nest were breathing. And resting in the center of the ash and obsidian, cradled in the deepest point of the bowl, was an egg. Alora stopped. It was large, roughly the size of a large watermelon. Its surface was a deep, burnished red, the color of cooling embers, and it was veined throughout with lines of gold that caught the column of light from above it and held it. She should not touch it. She knew that an object this clearly enchanted and this clearly alive in some essential way should not simply be touched by a person who did not yet understand what it was. She knew this. She crouched at the edge of the nest and reached out anyway. Her fingertips met the surface of the egg, and the gold veins flared with the sudden warm brightness of a fire catching an ember, a rush of light moving outward from the point of contact in a wave that traveled the entire surface of the shell. The heat against her palm was extraordinary, like holding her hands to a hearth in winter. And then, in the silence of the cavern, there was a sound, a crack. Alora pulled her hand back and looked. There, at the precise point where her fingertips had rested, a hairline fracture had appeared in the deep red shell, as though it were responding to her touch. Alora sat back on her heels in the ash an obsidian nest of a creature she could not yet explain. In a cavern in a cliff she had inherited from a great aunt she'd never met, and looked at the cracked egg in the column of pale clifftop light, and understood that, whatever her life had been up until this morning, it had been preparation. Something was hatching, and it had been waiting for her specifically. Chapter 4. The crack spread slowly at first. Alora hadn't moved from her crouch at the edge of the nest. She wasn't sure she was capable of moving. The hairline fracture she had triggered had been joined by two more, radiating outward from the first, in delicate branching lines that caught the column of light from above and held it like gold thread worked into a dark fabric. Then the whole shell moved. It was a small movement. The egg repositioned itself in the ash with a soft scraping sound, and then a section of the shell near the top fell away, and a sound came out of the gap that she had never heard anything like before. Not a cry, exactly. Something between a chime and a breath. A head emerged from the gap in the shell. It was small enough to fit in her cupped hands. The scales were the color of a ruby held to light, catching the cavern light in tiny gleams. Two eyes opened and found her face immediately, as if it had known exactly where she was before it had eyes to see her with. Her eyes were different shades of gold and orange, like a blazing fire. The small creature looked at Alora with those fiery eyes for a long, still moment. Then she made the sound again, the chime breath, and lurched forward out of the shell with an enthusiastic lack of coordination. She scrambled across the obsidian rim of the nest and fell directly into Alora's hands, which she had extended without deciding to, and sat there in her cupped palms and looked up at her as though this was precisely the arrangement it had planned. "Hello," Alora said, which was not her most articulate moment, but seemed to be the right thing to say. The dragon made a sound she was already beginning to think of as its version of acknowledgement, a small buzzing that she felt in her palms as much as heard, and then climbed up her wrist and along her forearm onto her shoulder, where she curled herself around the back of Alora's neck and settled comfortably. The weight of the little dragon was slight and warm against her neck, the small claws gentle on her collar. A tail draped over her other shoulder, and its narrow head rested just behind her left ear. Alora reached up carefully and touched one finger to the little dragon's small warm head. "Ruby," she said. She didn't know where the name came from, aside from the color of the little dragon's scales. She didn't have time to decide. It was simply the name. "Your name is Ruby." Alora sat in the cavern for longer than she intended. The shell lay in pieces in the obsidian nest, the gold veins in each fragment already dimming now that what they had been keeping warm was out in the world. The column of light from the fissure above had moved slightly with the progress of the morning, and the sea sound continued its resonant loop through the stone. And Alora sat at the edge of the nest with a dragon asleep against her neck and tried to assemble her situation into something she could think about clearly. She was in a cavern under a cliff, on the grounds of a manor she had inherited from a great aunt she had never met. The dragon egg had been here, waiting, she suspected, for her specifically, though she could not yet have said why she was so certain of that. The dragon that had hatched from it had climbed onto her shoulder and fallen asleep. There was a library in the manor with empty shelves. The secret wing of the Miss Vale library, which she had just gained access to for the first time, was apparently about something. Something the door had been locked against. Something that felt, given everything else about the past 24 hours, like it might be the most important research she had ever undertaken. She needed books. She needed information. She needed someone to tell her what a dragon egg was doing in a cave under her cliff, and what it meant that it had hatched when she touched it, and what was she supposed to do now. She knew exactly where to go. Getting Ruby back into the manor door was straightforward enough. The dragon slept through the cliff path entirely, a small warm weight breathing against Alora's neck, and she found herself moving carefully, instinctively minimizing the jostling of her steps. She went back through the manor, through the hallway with its sconces and its empty coat rack, past the library with its stripped shelves, past the foot of the stairs, and to the front door. She took the key from around her neck and put it in the lock and turned it, and the door opened to the quiet back passage of the Miss Vale library, the plain dark wood of the restricted wing door visible from the inside, the dust and paper smell of it coming through in the cool library air. Ruby stirred at the change in temperature, her fire eyes opening briefly, and Alora reached up and touched her small head. "We're going somewhere new," she said quietly. "I need you to be very good and very quiet and very small." She paused. "Two of those things you already are." Ruby made a sound that was not quite a grumble and tucked her head back down behind Alora's ear in a way that could charitably be interpreted as agreement. Alora stepped through the door. The restricted wing of the Missville Library was not large, but it was extraordinary. She stood inside it for the first time and turned slowly, taking it in. The shelves here were not empty. They were full, packed and dense and thoroughly organized in a system she didn't immediately recognize. The books, old enough in many cases to have spines so worn the titles were barely legible, interspersed with scroll cases and flat folios, and what appeared to be several bound collections of hand-drawn maps. The shelving covered 3 walls from the floor to the ceiling. A reading table occupied the center of the room, smaller than the one in Emberlight's library, with a single lamp. The floor wall held a series of framed illustrations she couldn't see clearly enough from there, but she could see enough. The illustrations were of dragons. She crossed to the nearest shelf and pulled a volume at random. Large, heavy, the cover worn smooth with handling, the title pressed in faded gold. On the Nature of History of Bonded Dragons, Volume 3. She pulled another. The Keeper Lineages of the Western Coast. Another Incubation, Bonding, and the First Fire. A practical manual for dragon keepers. She stood holding 3 books and felt Ruby shift against her neck. Her small head lifted and now was engaged in assessing its new environment. Her fire eyes moving with surprising focus around the walls of the books and illustrations. "I know," Alora said softly. "I think this room is about you." She sat down at the reading table and opened the first book. She lost an hour and a half without noticing. The books were dense and detailed and organized by subject. She read with focused speed. She had graduated top of her year in magical theory and knew how to extract what she needed from a text, making notes on the small pad she always kept in her coat pocket. And what she extracted was this: dragons bonded completely and specifically to a single person called a keeper. A bond that was already established on a spiritual level and, again, upon hatching, and held for the lifetime of both. The egg chose the keeper before hatching, selected by instinct, magical resonance, and blood recognition, the last of which gave her a particular pause that she underlined twice. If the mother was absent, an egg would wait indefinitely. The texts were clear on this, for its keeper to be present before hatching. If the mother dragon was absent, missing, or dead, the egg entered a state of deep stasis, and it simply waited. Days, years, decades, in documented cases, waiting for a dragon keeper by blood, whose presence would tell it that it was safe to begin. Ruby had waited for her. Ruby's mother was gone. She read that last part twice, sitting very still, with Ruby warm and sleeping on her shoulder, and the lamp casting a small circle of gold light across the page. The mother dragon's absence didn't read in the text as death necessarily. There were cases of mothers who had been taken, separated from the nest by force, which meant that somewhere Ruby's mother may exist, or have existed, and whatever had happened to her had happened close enough to Emberlight to leave the egg in the cave below the cliff, in its nest of obsidian and ash, waiting. She was adding a note to her pad when footsteps sounded in the passage outside the door. Ruby's head came up from her shoulder with alertness, her fire eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that was startling in something so small. A low sound came from her, vibrating against Alora's neck. "It's all right," Alora said quietly. "It's just—" The footsteps stopped outside the door. Ruby made her decision, apparently, before Alora could finish the sentence. The small body on her shoulder went rigid for a fraction of a second, and then a bolt of magic left the dragon, with a sound like a plucked string, passing through the wooden door as though it weren't there, and then the footsteps outside stopped. Alora stared at the door, then at Ruby. Ruby had resettled on her shoulder, considering the situation satisfactorily resolved. "Ruby," Alora stood up, "what did you do?" She tried the door. The handle turned from the inside, and she opened it into the hallway. Ash stood frozen in the corridor, one hand raised as though he had been about to knock, his expression caught in surprise, eyebrows slightly raised, mouth just beginning to open. That had been his expression when he heard someone in the restriction passage and came to investigate. He was entirely motionless, suspended like a figure in a painting, very detailed and not moving even slightly. Alora looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. She turned back to Ruby, who was watching the frozen librarian from the doorway, with what appeared to be satisfaction. "Ruby, I need you to undo that, please." Ruby blinked slowly. Her fire eyes moved from Ash to Alora with patient incomprehension. "He's not a threat," Alora said. "He's a librarian." She pointed at Ash, who remained serenely motionless. "Be a good girl and reanimate the nice librarian." Ruby regarded Ash for another moment. Then she looked at Alora, and then back at Ash, and then she appeared to lose interest in the situation entirely, and tucked her head back against Alora's neck. Alora looked at Ash. He was still frozen. "Ruby!" And then Ash finished the motion he had started, and knocked on the door that Alora was already standing in front of, which brought him up short, his knuckles stopping an inch from her collarbone. He blinked, looked at her, looked at the open door behind her. The door had been locked for as long as anyone in Missvale could remember. He stopped, looked at his own raised hand as though it had arrived there without his full understanding of the route. "I'm sorry, I was just coming to—" He stopped again. Alora watched him realize that he couldn't clearly account for the last 30 seconds. "How did you get in there?" "The key fit," Alora said. He looked at the door again, and then at something past her shoulder, and his expression changed entirely. Ruby had lifted her head. She was watching Ash with her fire eyes fully open, the garnet scales catching the lamplight from inside the room. Her small tail curled loosely over Alora's other shoulder. She was, objectively, extraordinary to look at, tiny and glowing with the scale edges in the warm library light. Ash said nothing for a moment. "Is that," he said carefully, "a dragon?" "Yes," said Alora. Another pause. "A baby dragon. She hatched this morning." He looked from Ruby to Alora and back to Ruby. "Can I—" He gestured at the open door behind her, at the room full of books she had just spent an hour and a half in. "May I see inside?" Alora considered him for a moment. He could have reported her. He could still report her. The restricted wing, the duplicate key situation, the small ruby-scaled creature on her shoulder that was now watching him with what appeared to be diminishing hostility and increasing curiosity. He hadn't reported her. He had come to knock, not to confront, and there was something in his face, the way his eyes had not gone to the locked open door first, but to Ruby, and held there with genuine wonder rather than alarm, that made the same instinct she had always trusted say yes. "Come in," she said, and stepped back to let him through. He moved through the room slowly and with reverence, tilting his head to read spines, reaching out to touch a folio cover. He went along all 3 walls, and then stood in front of the framed illustrations and looked at them for a long time without speaking. They were detailed and beautiful, dragons in various sizes and aspects, some in flight, some at rest, some depicted in a close proximity to human figures, that the captions described as keepers. "I always wondered," he said. "I've worked here for 3 years, and that door has never been open. The head librarian before me said it was a private archive. She didn't know what was in it." He turned from the illustrations to look at Alora. "How long have you been accessing it?" "For the last hour and a half," she said. "And the key?" "Came from my great-aunt's estate." She paused, and then, because he was still there and still calm, and had looked at a baby dragon with wonder instead of alarm, and could clearly be trusted with at least the version of events that didn't involve magic doors and clifftop manors quite yet. "She died recently. I inherited some things, including, apparently, the means to open that door." He nodded, processing this with quiet thoroughness. Then he looked at Ruby, who had been observing him from Alora's shoulder with an attentive, fiery gaze. "And she was in the—" He stopped himself. "You know what? I think there's quite a lot here, isn't there?" "Quite a lot," Alora agreed. "And you're not going to tell me all of it right now?" "I've only known most of it myself since this morning," she said. He accepted this with a small nod. Then he looked at her directly with his blue eyes, without pressure, and said, "I'm not going to report any of this. I want you to know that. This room should be accessible to someone who clearly belongs in it, and I think," he glanced at Ruby, "I think there's something going on here that's considerably more important than any library protocol." Alora's chest loosened with relief, getting the confirmation of what her heart had already told her. She could trust him. "I'll help you find what you need," he said. "Whatever you're looking for in here, just let me know what you need." "I will," she said, and meant it. "I think for now I need to take her home." She looked at Ruby, who had chosen this moment to yawn, a small toothy yawn. "She's had an eventful morning." Ash looked at the yawn as though he were filing away dragon yawn, in a category he intended to think about later, of course. She gathered her notes and moved toward the door, and then paused. "Ash." He looked at her. "Thank you. You could have handled that very differently." He shook his head slightly, as though this hadn't been a consideration. "Come back when you need to," he said. "After hours might be better. Now that it's open, I can make the door look locked, but keep it unlocked." Are you allowed to do that?" "I'm the librarian," he said. "I'm allowed to make reasonable accommodations for serious research." He glanced at Ruby one more time, her eyes having finally resolved the librarian question in his favor. "I'd say this qualifies." Alora smiled. The first time she had done that today without any complicated feeling underneath it. "I'll be back," she said. "Soon." She went back through the door with Ruby sleeping on her shoulder, the key in her hand and her notes in her pocket. She stepped into the manor hallway and let the salt air smell of emberlight settle around her. She had a feeling that the answers she still needed were not all in the library. The manor itself had been Bess's. Bess, who had apparently been something very like what Alora was beginning to suspect she herself might be, a keeper. The word settled differently now that she had read it in the books. The answers were there, in the room she hadn't yet opened, the papers on the study desk, the stripped library shelves that someone had deliberately emptied, in the mirrors, in the walls, in the way this house had felt like it was waiting when she arrived. She went upstairs, settled Ruby on the bed in the warm curve of her folded coat, and stood at the bedroom window looking out at the gray sea. She had the feeling she was only at the very beginning of understanding what she had come home to. Chapter 5. Alora became aware of the morning in stages. First there was the gray-white of the early coastal dawn coming through the tall bedroom windows. Then there was the sound of the sea, she was already beginning to think of as Emberlight's baseline. The constant low conversation of water against the cliff that she suspected she would eventually stop hearing, the way one stops hearing a clock. Then there was the sound of a rapid, small thump, thump, thump crash, coming from the direction of the wardrobe. She opened her eyes. Ruby was doing laps. There was no better word for it. The dragon had somehow, at some point during the night, graduated from the folded coat where Alora had settled her, and was now conducting what could only be described as a high-speed circuit of the bedroom. From the foot of the bed to the wardrobe, sharp turn, along the wall to the dressing table, sharp turn, across the window seat, sharp turn, back to the foot of the bed. Her ruby scales catching the dawn light in brief flashes of red as she went. Small claws clacking on the stone floor with a rapid, light-footed percussion. She appeared to have been having an excellent time. "Ruby," Alora said. Ruby completed another lap without acknowledging this. "Ruby," Alora sat up. "It's very early." Ruby banked around the dressing table leg, knocked something over, the ceramic dish Alora had put her hairpins in, which hit the floor with a clatter and spun, and continued without breaking stride. Alora pushed her hair back from her face and watched 2 more complete circuits before she noticed the shiny pile. It was in the corner between the wardrobe and the wall, a small, deliberate accumulation of objects that had not been there last night. A brass button, the hairpin dish, 2 small river stones from somewhere Alora couldn't immediately account for, a fragment of what appeared to be mirror glass, smooth-edged and harmless. Several items that had come from her open suitcase, selected apparently on the basis of metallic or reflective properties. Her silver pen, the small compass from her navigation practice in 3rd year, the foil wrapping from the cookies she'd had in her coat pocket. Ruby had been collecting things. "Are those mine?" Alora said. Ruby completed 1 more lap, slowed, and trotted to the pile. She nosed through the collection, selected the silver pen, picked it up in her small jaws, and brought it to the foot of the bed with the clear expectation that this would be received as the gift it was intended to be. "Thank you," Alora said seriously, accepting the pen. "Very thoughtful." Ruby's tail moved in the rapid side to side that Alora was already beginning to identify as pleased. Then she went back to the pile and found something near the bottom and picked it up, trotted back to the bed, dropped it on the blanket, and looked at Alora with her fire eyes fully open and attentive. It was a key. Not the iron key on its dart cord. That was still around Alora's neck. She could feel it. This was different, smaller, older, brass, gone dark with age, with a circular bow, a length of faded ribbon threaded through it. Tied to the ribbon was a small paper tag. The writing on it faded, but legible in the careful hand she was beginning to recognize as Bess's. She held it to the light. Main bedroom. Alora looked at the key. She looked at Ruby, who was watching her and awaiting a response. "Where did you find this?" Ruby blinked once, which was not an answer, but was very Ruby. She had not looked for Bess's bedroom. She recognized this as an instinctive deference, a sense that Aunt Bess's private space should remain private until she had some clearer understanding of what she was doing there and what rights she was actually operating under. She had cleaned the house, explored the library, found the cliff cave and the egg. She had treated Bess's personal rooms as a boundary she wasn't quite ready to cross. But the key had been found, apparently, and delivered, and the tag seemed to say, "When the time is right," in every way except words. She dressed, pocketed the brass key, and went to find the room. It was at the end of the upper corridor, past the room she had claimed for herself, past a linen cupboard and a narrow window overlooking the cliff top. The door was plain and dark, like all the doors in the manor. She put the brass key in the lock and turned it. The door opened not to Bess's bedroom, but into a cave. Alora stood in the doorway and stared. The cave was enormous, not the intimate, contained cavern of Ruby's nest below the cliff, but a vast, vaulted system of interconnected chambers, the stone worn smooth in places and cracked in others, the ceiling rising to heights that the dim, ambient light of the space couldn't fully resolve. The air was warm, the same warmth she had felt in Ruby's cave, but amplified. The smell of it was mineral and slightly organic. The floor of the nearest chamber showed the signs of habitation in unmistakable detail. Not one nest, but many. A dozen at least that she could see, of varying sizes, each one a construction of stone and ash, and compressed materials that she now recognized from Ruby's nest. Some were enormous, the obsidian stones arranged in bowls that could have held something the size of a horse. Some were smaller, all were empty. Along the cave walls, carved in the stone at intervals, there were deep shelves holding the remnants of things, ash pots and carved implements and objects she couldn't identify. In the shelves, sections of the cave wall were covered in carvings, dragons in flight, dragons curled in rest, dragons and human figures in close proximity. Keeper posture she had seen in the library illustrations, a visual record carved into the living rock by hands that had understood what they were documenting. A dragon sanctuary. The full understanding of what she was looking at arrived slowly, because it was too large to take in quickly. This cave had housed dozens. A community. A refuge. Bess's refuge, presumably. A dragon keeper's sanctuary, built and maintained and populated, and then emptied. She stood in the entrance for a long moment, and then she turned around and put the brass key in the lock from the inside, and came back through into Bess's bedroom. Ruby was sitting in the hallway, waiting patiently. "Come on, then," Alora said. Bess's bedroom was large and simply furnished, a wide bed with a plain headboard, bookshelves that were not empty, she noted with a complicated feeling, but held personal volumes rather than research texts. A writing desk by the window with a good view of the sea. Several framed drawings that she would look at more carefully later. A deep armchair, a small fireplace, and against the far wall, draped in a sheet that had white once, and had gone to cream with time, something large and rectangular and vertical. Ruby had already crossed the room before Alora had taken it all in. The dragon's nose went to the sheet's lower corner and took the fabric in her small jaws and pulled. "Ruby, don't." The sheet came down in a slow cascade, pulling on the floor, and revealed a mirror. It was large, floor to ceiling, set in a dark wood frame carved with the same repeating pattern she had half noticed on the staircase banner and now recognized with a lurch of recognition. Scales. The frame was carved with overlapping scales. The glass itself was old, the silver of it deepened with age to a warmth that made the reflection slightly golden, and for a moment Alora only saw herself in it, travel-worn, hair loose, holding the brass key still in one hand, and then the reflection hazed, like breath on cold glass, but from the inside. And then there was someone else in the mirror. She was elderly, with white hair pulled back and dark eyes that were sharp and warm in equal measure. "There you are," the woman said in the mirror, in a voice that was clear and unhurried and entirely at ease with the extraordinary nature of the situation. "I was wondering when you'd find this room. I should have known it would be Ruby that led you to it." Alora found her voice. "You're Bess." "I am." Her dark eyes moved to Ruby, who had positioned herself at Alora's feet and was regarding the mirror with the attention of recognition. "And this is Ruby. Hello, little one. You're the image of your mother." Ruby made the chime breath sound, just once, very softly. Something moved through Bess's expression that was too complex and too private to name. Then she looked back at Alora and settled herself, visibly, into the present moment. "Sit down, my dear," she said. "There's a great deal I need to tell you, and I want to tell it properly." Alora sat in the deep armchair. Ruby climbed into her lap. Alora put one hand on her warm, ruby-scaled back and looked at her great-aunt in the mirror and listened. Bess spoke for a long time. She had spelled the mirror to be a communication method for her spirit before she was kidnapped, a contingency, one of several she had put in place when it became clear to her that she was a target and was too old and tired to run. The first letter to Alora's estate solicitor had been spelled years earlier, when Alora's parents died, in case something happened to her. Bess knew they would be coming for her next. "I wanted to be sure you would find your way here, even if I wasn't here to bring you myself," she said. And before they came for her, she had spelled a raven, the letter the key, and trusted that the family instinct would bring Alora where she needed to be. Alora's mother had been Bess's niece, her sister's daughter, a dragon keeper herself from a family line in which the gift had run for generations in ways that were rare and remarkable, even by the standards of an already rare ability. Dragon keepers were not common. They had never been. The bond between a keeper and their dragon was specific and unable to be duplicated, a depth of magic that was almost unheard of and capable of things that ordinary magical study could not fully account for. "And that," Bess said, "is why they came for us." A family of witches, which she never learned the names of, had been aware of dragon keepers and their value for decades. Their primary motivation was acquisition and exploitation. They used dragons as a resource. Dragon scales, used in the most powerful potions in existence. Potions that required ingredients of extraordinary magical density, things that couldn't be substituted. A single dragon scale was among the most potent potion ingredients. Scales were taken from a dragon held in captivity and harvested. In dragon keeper magic, Fyresight, Bess said, using the word for the first time, and Alora felt it land like something she had been waiting to hear without knowing she was waiting, was something that they wanted to study, to understand, to see whether it could be extracted, replicated, used by people who hadn't been born to it. "They kept me for years," Bess said. "They weren't cruel in the obvious ways, they were simply relentless, and they had no interest in anything I was except what I could show them about how the magic worked." She had died in captivity of old age. Alora sat with this for a moment. Ruby's back rose and fell with slow, warm regularity under her hand. "My parents," she said. "You said they died when I was a baby?" "They did. They were dragon keepers, both of them. When the witch family came for our family, for the dragons and the keepers, your parents resisted. They were young and strong, and they had their dragons, and they believed, correctly, that it mattered to fight, and that they were strong enough to win. They were, to their surprise, overpowered and were killed in the fight. I was taken. You were an infant, and I was watching you for them when it happened. The evil witches didn't know you existed. I made sure of that. I put you in the orphanage in Mistvale, specifically because I wanted you to be safe, and I had little time to act. Obscurity is its own protection, and you became an orphan with no name. You were safer there than you would have been anywhere. I might have tried to keep you myself. And sure enough, they came for me. The orphanage, the academy, the years of feeling like she was waiting for something to begin, all of it, she understood now, was Bess's design, the most protective arrangement available to someone who was herself already captured and running out of options. They don't know I exist, Alora said. They did not, as of when I died. They know the manor is here. They came to it, took the books, ensured they had taken anything that might be useful. They took all the dragons. Bess's eyes went again briefly to Ruby. They took them all from the sanctuary, from the cave behind the upper corridor, through the door. They took Ruby's mother from the outer cave while she was hunting. She had left the nest that day, and before she went, she spelled the egg to be invisible. She always did that when she left. A caution she had learned and practiced. The spell held long after she was taken, long enough that by the time it faded, you were already on your way. Alora thought about the pull she had felt, the warmth coming up through the floor of the manor, drawing her outside, drawing her along the cliff path to the cave. It was not a coincidence. The bond found her as surely as she had found it. "Ruby's mother," she said. "Is she alive?" Bess was quiet for a moment. "Her name is Ember. Yes, they take dragons for their scales for study. They had a use for her." She held Alora's eyes. "She was bonded to me, and even after my death, my spirit still fills her." Alora nodded in relief. "There are things you need to do," Bess said, "immediately before anything else. Emberlight needs protecting. They know the manor is here, but they don't know you are here, or who you are, and they don't have any reason to come back, but you still need to have some security." She walked Alora through the warding. A layered protection enchantment, Emberlight specific, designed to conceal her magic and energy and prevent them from discovering someone is living there. Even though the witch family had discovered a way to overpower a dragon keeper's magic, the ward would buy her a little time to escape if necessary. "You'll feel your magic differently now," Bess said, partway through. "Since Ruby hatched, don't be alarmed by it." "I noticed," Alora said. "It felt larger, like something opened." "It did. The bond amplifies both of you. Dragon and keeper grow together. Your magic strengthens hers, and hers strengthens yours. And the longer you're bonded, the less distinguishable the boundary between them becomes. You are a dragon keeper, Alora, from a family of dragon keepers with a very rare gift called Fyresight. Your mother had it, I had it, you have it, and not a lot of people know it even exists." "What is it?" Alora said. "What does it do?" "You can share your magical abilities. It also allows you to look into your bonded dragon's eyes and see." Bess paused. "Images, visions, things Ruby has seen, things she knows, things that are coming. You can communicate through it, not with words, not at first, but with images and intention and feeling, in a language that deepens with practice until it becomes something very close to speech. Look into her eyes, Alora. Not now. Learn the wording first. Put the protections on the manor. Settle yourselves. But soon, she has things to show you." Alora looked down at Ruby. Ruby looked up at her. Her fire eyes were deep and patient, even though she was a baby. Alora could sense that Ruby had the knowledge of an old soul. "All right," Alora said quietly to Bess, and to Ruby in equal measure. "Tell me how to ward the manor, and also how you made that key." After Bess instructed her how to make another enchanted key, she spent the rest of the morning on the cliff top. The warding was the most complex magic she had ever attempted. The way each enchantment had to be anchored to the stone of the cliff and the foundations of the manor and connected to the others in a web that held without gaps. She worked her way around the cliff's perimeter with Ruby on her shoulder, and she felt what Bess had described, the magic running hotter and more responsive than it had before the hatching, deeper in her chest, as though a door she hadn't known was closed had been opened from the other side. At each anchor point she felt Ruby attend, felt the small body on her shoulder orient toward the magic in progress, and felt something come back from that attention that was neither thought nor words, but was unmistakably present. The beginning of a language, the first syllables of something that would become fluent. By midday, the word was set. She could feel it. A membrane she couldn't see, but could sense, settled over the cliff and the manor like a second skin. She stood at the cliff edge and looked out at the gray-green sea. Ruby's tail curled loosely over her shoulder, and her own magic settled back into its new resting state, which was larger and warmer than the old one, and felt, for the first time since the raven tapped at the dormitory window, that she had some idea of what she was doing. She turned back toward Emberlight. "Come on," she said to Ruby. "Bess said we need to train." Ruby lifted her head from Alora's shoulder, gold eyes catching the coastal light in a brief, brilliant flash, and made the sound that meant yes.